I'm going to explain to you why if you don't have annual meeting minutes for your LLC for every year it's been in existence, that entity is probably worthless and all your assets could be at risk. In this video, I'm going to walk you through why annual meetings are so important for LLCs and show you how you can document them to make sure that you're covered. So why is this so important? The whole point of LLCs or limited liability companies is for asset protection. If you don't follow the proper procedures and the required things that you need to do to maintain that entity, your LLC is going to be worthless and it's not going to protect your assets. Most statistics show that over 90% of LLCs are not maintained properly and would not protect you if you were ever in a lawsuit that involved the assets that LLC was trying to protect. In my experience in working, when I used to work with clients on this, on asset protection and other things, I never saw an LLC that I thought was set up properly and maintained properly. So in most cases, people use online services like LegalZoom to set up their LLC, but this is one of the reasons why that is not a good approach. If you're not going to set your LLC up properly and maintain it every single year, it is not even worth the cost and effort that you've used to try to get that entity in place in the first place. So let's talk about what you should do every single year to make sure you're covered on the annual meeting minutes requirement. I'm even going to share with you a template so that you can easily just do this yourself every single year and make sure you follow and can check off that procedure for your entity. So to start with, yes, you do need to do this every single year. There's a lot of mixed messaging out there and a lot of diverging opinions on whether or not you do or do not need to have annual meetings. But as an attorney who has practice in asset protection and as someone who also owns a lot of LLCs personally, I can guarantee you this is something you should be doing for your entities. You need to do this regardless of how you're using your LLC. So I know a lot of people might have LLCs to own businesses that they operate. So whether it's that for a business, whether it's an LLC to own real estate, whether you're, doing the Wyoming passive LLC strategy for asset protection that I talk a lot about, it doesn't matter how you're using that LLC, you still need to do this and you need to document that meeting. If you own multiple entities, you need to have multiple meetings. You need to have meeting minutes for each LLC and they need to be separate documents. This is also the case even if you are the sole owner of the LLC. So it might seem kind of silly to have a meeting with yourself, but yes, you still need to do it and you still need to document it. So what happens if I don't have annual meeting minutes for each year that my LLC was in existence? So this is what could happen in practice. Let's say you're a business owner who operates a grocery store through an LLC. A customer comes into your store and slips and falls on a peach and gets really hurt and tries to sue you. The whole point of that LLC and for owning your grocery store through that limited liability company is that you want to ring fence the liability from anything that could happen, like a customer slipping and falling and hurting themselves, into that entity. You want the sole assets that that person can come after from that to be the assets that that LLC owns. This means that the purpose is to try to protect your personal assets. You don't want the person to be able to come outside of the LLC and go after things like your personal residence, like your other investments, like stock portfolios, things like that. You want to try to keep that liability within that LLC. So if you didn't do the proper procedures every year and have things like annual meeting minutes and follow the document these types of things, then when you're sued by that customer, they could then ignore the LLC. The court will just set the LLC aside and say that that was not a real entity because you weren't maintaining it properly. And then all of your personal assets are at risk. So basically in that context, your LLC was worthless and it wasn't even worth the cost and effort that it took you to set it up in the first place. So what exactly do you need to do with this annual meeting? So first of all, you need to actually have a meeting. So all of the owners of the LLC need to sit down and meet, and whether that's virtually or in person, but the meeting does need to actually take place. It doesn't have to be a very long meeting. It just needs to be a reasonable amount of time that can cover the things that you're going to document in your meeting minutes. Sometimes the meetings can be as short as 15 minutes, so it doesn't have to be something that takes hours and hours. What do you cover at the meeting? So anything that is really relevant to the entity as a whole. So if that's a business, for example, or an LLC that invests in real estate, whatever it is, you might want to review the financial performance of the entity. So what were the financial statements like last year? What are the forecasts for future years? Do you have any big expected changes? Are you going to sell any big assets of the LLC? Are you going to hire any big employees? Are you going to do anything like let on in another owner of the LLC? Anything like that that's really a major change to the LLC itself or the operations of the LLC? That is something that's probably worth discussing and documenting in those meeting minutes. So what should you actually have for this meeting? So I like to have an agenda prepared beforehand, and then I attach that agenda to the back of my meeting minutes once those are documented. Here you can see 2 samples from my LLC meeting minutes for this past year. This is just a good idea of the types of things that I discuss when I'm doing my LLC annual meeting, but I like to have an agenda prepared so that it does look like a bona fide meeting that you prepared for. You also want to have someone taking notes at the meeting, so that can be whoever you want it to be. It can be yourself, it can be a spouse, a child, another owner of the entity. You just want to make sure someone is taking notes so that you can take those notes and use them when you're documenting and putting together your meeting minutes. So you do need to have formal meeting minutes prepared at the end of the meeting. This is going to document that the meeting took place, and it's going to be the form or the document that you can hand over if you were ever sued to verify and prove that you were operating this entity properly and you were treating it as a bona fide business. So what do those meeting minutes need to contain? I actually have a template. This is my own personal template that I use for all of my annual meeting minutes. I'll link to it below in the comments. This will help you be able to just have your annual meeting, use my template to document it, and then you can check that off as that requirement is done for the year. The meeting minutes need to cover who was at the meeting, where it took place, when it took place. You need to cover what was discussed at the meeting, any big decisions that were made, and you also need to have it signed by all the members or owners of the LLC. It's important that once you have these meeting minutes documented, that you maintain those in your corporate files. So whatever system you use to keep your legal files in place for that entity, you need to keep a copy of these meeting minutes. Some people suggest keeping them for at least 6 years. I personally like to keep them forever because I just never know what's going to happen. So I think better to have these in place because they are so important. And I just keep these on hand indefinitely as long as my LLC is in existence. So you might be asking yourself, what do I do if I didn't do annual meetings in the past for my LLCs and if I didn't document them with meeting minutes? So my suggestion would be that you do this now. I know a lot of people haven't followed this requirement. I think certainly you want to do it going forward. So put that reminder on your calendar every year that tells you this is the date where I need to either have my LLC meeting minute or schedule it, and then get those minutes prepared. Make sure you always do this every single year going forward. If you are going to do it for a few years going back to make sure you're covered, don't lie and backdate the meeting minutes. That's really, not allowed legally. Just put the current date, the date you actually had the meeting. Talk about what was relevant for that year. Keep those in your files, and certainly do this every single year going forward. Just make this a habit and keep it consistent. I want to be clear that this is not the only requirement that you need to do for maintaining your LLC. So I'm not meant for this to be the only thing that you have to do. You certainly need to follow the other LLC requirements, like making sure you have a separate bank account, not commingling funds, treating that LLC as separate from yourself and your personal affairs. This is just one of many requirements that you need to meet to make sure your LLC is covered and will actually protect you in the future. So this was just a quick overview of how to do annual meetings for your LLC and how to make sure that you document them properly with meeting minutes. I really want to help protect you. Part of building wealth is making sure you protect your assets. And so this is definitely something that you need to do every single year. So make sure that you get in the habit of having those annual meetings and documenting those meetings with minutes. If you want to use my template for how I document my meeting minutes every year for all of my LLCs, check out the link below in the comments.